Think about the last time a story hooked you by the throat. A celebrity crying on TV. A viral charity video with sad piano music. A scandal that made you gasp and immediately hit share. In that moment, you cared deeply. You were ready to donate, cancel someone, march in the streets. But then, weeks later, that same story feels tired. The faces blur. The updates get annoying. You scroll past without a flicker. Not because you're heartless, but because sympathy has an expiration date. It's like milk in the fridge. At first it's fresh, nourishing, emotional. But leave it out too long. Keep pouring glass after glass, and suddenly, it curdles. That's what happened to Harry and Meghan. Their Oprah interview was the sympathy jackpot. Two people escaping a gilded cage. The world was captivated. Finally, the royals exposed. For a moment, Meghan was every woman who felt unheard. Harry was the rebel prince. We cared. We cared so much. But then came the endless sequels. The Netflix tell-all, the Spotify podcast, the memoir Spare with enough family drama to make Jerry Springer blush. The sympathy high didn't just fade, it turned sour. They weren't victims anymore. They were professional whiners. And that's the pattern. The rise is always thrilling. The fall is inevitable. So the question is, why does our compassion collapse so fast? The answer isn't just cultural. It's hardwired into the way our brains process empathy. So why do we stop caring? Why does sympathy vanish almost as quickly as it arrives? Psychologists call it compassion fatigue. When you're exposed to suffering over and over, your brain starts to protect itself. It builds emotional calluses, like a nurse who stops crying after the 100th patient. It's not cruelty, it's survival. Then there's habituation. The first time you hear a shocking story, your brain lights up like Times Square. The fifth time, it barely flickers. We're wired to normalize the extraordinary, which is great if you live near volcanoes, but terrible if your job is selling sympathy. And let's not forget confirmation bias. If you already like someone, their story feels moving. If you already hate them, the same story feels manipulative. That's why Harry and Meghan could be victims and villains at the same time. Fans heard bravery. Critics heard vanity. Same words. Different truths. Finally, there's cognitive dissonance. We resent feeling like we're being emotionally manipulated. So when a story starts to feel repetitive, our brains rebel. We don't just stop caring. We get annoyed. So sympathy isn't endless. It's fragile. Burn through it too fast. And what was once empathy quickly curdles into eye rolls. Which raises a bigger question. Is compassion actually finite? Or have we just cheapened it by turning it into content? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Sympathy behaves like a resource. It feels infinite when we're overflowing with it. But use it too often, and suddenly, the tank runs dry. Arthur Schopenhauer would have nodded grimly. For him, life was mostly suffering, and compassion was just our brief rebellion against that fact. But if suffering never ends, how long before compassion collapses under its own weight? Nietzsche took it even further. He saw constant victimhood as a trap. To him, dwelling in pity destroys strength. What people respect isn't suffering. It's the will to rise above it. So when Harry released a book stuffed with frostbitten appendages and family gossip, Nietzsche would have said, "This is not courage. This is weakness disguised as truth." And then there's Carl Jung. He'd remind us that compassion has a shadow. Every archetype does. The mother nurtures, but can also smother. Compassion heals. But too much compassion? It mutates into suspicion, resentment, even contempt. People start asking, are you sharing your pain to connect or to control? And here's the real kicker. We've turned sympathy into a kind of currency. Tell your story. Get attention. Convert attention into clicks, deals, headlines. But the more you monetize compassion, the faster it devalues. Like printing money until it's worthless. So maybe sympathy was never meant to be a renewable resource. Maybe it was meant to be rare, precious, and fleeting. Which makes the next problem inevitable. If you keep repeating the same sob story, the audience doesn't just tune out. They start charging you interest. If sympathy burns out so fast, what do audiences actually want? Spoiler: it isn't endless pain, it's the promise of transformation. Modern audiences crave resilience over repetition. We'll listen to your suffering once. We'll lean in, maybe even cry with you. But then, we want to see what you do with it. Turn the pain into growth. Turn the setback into strength. Turn the trauma into wisdom. That's why redemption arcs are magnetic. We don't idolize those who stay stuck. We idolize those who claw their way back. Britney Spears' comeback show. Robert Downey Jr. from mugshots to Marvel. Even historical figures like Mandela. People who went through the fire and emerged with something new. But stay too long in victimhood, and the culture flips on you. What once earned sympathy now looks like self-indulgence. Audiences don't just move on. They punish you for overstaying your welcome. So the real cultural lesson is this: sympathy is fleeting. Resilience is timeless. The audience doesn't need you to be flawless, but they need to believe you can rise, which leads us to the deepest question of all. If sympathy has an expiration date, what does that say about us? Do we actually care about people? Or do we just consume their pain until it no longer entertains us? Sympathy feels infinite, but in practice, it's fragile. It sparks fast, it fades faster, and once it's gone, it rarely comes back. Harry and Meghan's saga proves it. Oprah gave them the world's sympathy, but they burned through it like a matchstick in the wind. And once compassion turned into cynicism, no brand deal could buy it back. So what does that say about us? Are we truly compassionate beings? Or just emotional consumers, snacking on people's pain until it gets repetitive, and then tossing it aside? Maybe it's not just about Harry and Meghan. Maybe it's about a culture that's addicted to novelty, but allergic to endurance. A culture that rewards the first tear, but mocks the second. A culture that loves the victim's story, but worships the comeback. Sympathy isn't a renewable resource. It's a fragile spark. And once it burns out, all that's left is smoke. The real question is, are we ready to admit that our compassion was never about caring, but about being entertained? If this made you rethink how sympathy works, subscribe for more Decoded, where psychology meets culture and stories unravel into deeper truths.